2,000 years ago, Persian priests warned of Gotia, a chained celestial serpent whose fiery tail would one day bring judgment. In July 2025, astronomers detect III Atlas, a bizarre interstellar comet defying scientific explanation. Its tail coils like a writhing serpent as it approaches the sun, fragmenting in brilliant bursts before vanishing. Is this merely cosmic coincidence or something more unsettling? Ancient texts described a star that would return repeatedly, testing humanity with fire until the final day when metals melt and truth prevails. The Persians believed Gotia watches us, waiting. Perhaps the sky itself remembers what we've forgotten. 2,500 years ago, Persian priests warned of a chained serpent in the sky, a star with a tail waiting for its hour. They said it would return again and again, each time bringing fire, famine, or ruin, until the final day when it would fall and the world itself would be tested. In 2025, astronomers saw something strange. A wanderer from beyond the stars slid into our solar system, twisting, flickering, refusing to behave as science said it should. Then it was gone, leaving only questions. What the Persians wrote, what they feared, and what they believed would come after such a sign. That is a story more unsettling than any telescope can tell. On July 1st, 2025, in the clear night of the Chilean desert, astronomers at the Atlas Survey Station noticed a glimmer that should not have been there. Their instruments were built to give humanity its last warning against dangerous wanderers, asteroids or comets that might one day strike Earth. What they found instead was something far stranger, a faint body gliding in from the dark between the stars. It was no ordinary discovery. This was only the third interstellar comet ever seen by humankind, following Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. Oumuamua had passed through like a riddle, tumbling oddly, reflecting light in ways no one fully explained. Borisov, 2 years later, was brighter, wilder, a classic comet, but undeniably from beyond. Now came III Atlas, the third visitor, and from the very start it stood apart from every familiar object that drifts around the sun. Even at 670 million kilometers from the sun, it was awake. Its light rose and fell in irregular pulses, a heartbeat on the edge of detection. Astronomers wrote tidy notes, outgassing here, fragment ejection there. And yet, the pattern resisted tidy classification. Comets do certain things. This one kept interrupting the rulebook. It did not merely move, it seemed to insist. Observatories across the world turned toward it. Some reported light curves that dipped and rose like a signal. Others noticed that its outbursts came not with randomness, but with unnerving rhythm. At conferences and in private messages, scientists debated whether their instruments were misled by dust or whether something in the comet's structure was behaving in a way no one had seen before. For every cautious explanation, another voice whispered that the object was acting like nothing born in our system. But what if I told you there is more to it? What astrophysics measures today, ancient Persia had already predicted with striking similarities. And more than that, with uncanny coincidences. 2.5 millennia ago, Zoroastrian priests recorded a tail star called Gotia, a chained serpent of flame whose coming would draw so close to the sun that metals would melt and the world would be tested by rivers of fire. The prophecy is chilling in its precision. Gotia would uncoil across the sky like a dragon. It would scorch the very bones of the earth. The righteous would pass unharmed through the molten flood, while the wicked would be destroyed. This was not merely a comet. It was judgment chained in the heavens, waiting for release. And when astronomers in 2025 turned their lenses toward Three-Eye Atlas, what they saw carried echoes of those ancient words. Its tail did not trail neatly behind it. It writhed, coiled, twisted in long arcs, shaped by solar winds and magnetic fields into the likeness of a serpent fighting its bonds. Instruments recorded gas and plasma, but to the eye, it looked alive. As it swept nearer to the sun, the comet began to break apart. Its surface boiled away in flashes, each fragment flaring bright before dissolving into the void. To scientists, these were outbursts, sublimation, disintegration, fragile ice succumbing to heat. To anyone reading the Persian texts, they were the serpent thrashing, metals melting, fire pouring from the heavens. To scientists, the comet was ice and dust disobeying physics. To the keepers of prophecy, it looked like a verdict written in flame. Yet the Persian warning goes further. Gautier was not a one-time disaster. In the vision of the Frashokereti, the final renovation of the world, the serpent star returns again and again until the last fire cleanses creation. The ancients did not speak of chance encounters. They spoke of appointments. Imagine the fire priests of Persia, their temples blazing with eternal flames, looking up into the night sky. To them, every comet was a reminder of Gautier's promise. The stars were not random, but soldiers in a cosmic war between truth and lie. And the serpent star was the final weapon, held in chains until the end. Each flicker, each fiery apparition, was a warning that the chain might one day break. When Three-Eye Atlas reached perihelion, its closest pass to the sun, it blazed in one final burst, fragments scattering like embers across space, and then it was gone. The sky fell silent again, but the resemblance it carried to prophecy could not be forgotten. A serpent tail, a body melting in the furnace of the sun. A return promised at the end of time. The ancient priests said the serpent would come back. Modern science, too, admits that interstellar visitors will not stop with Three-Eye Atlas. More are out there, moving toward us, even now. The only question is whether they are blind wanderers of ice, or something far less indifferent. So July 2025 may be remembered not just as the discovery of a comet, but as the moment when modern astronomy and ancient prophecy looked at the same fire in the sky and described the same serpent. And if that is true, one question still hangs above us, sharp as any star. What exactly is watching us? Across the high plateaus of ancient Persia, fire altars burned beneath the open sky. Their flames leapt against the darkness, smoke curling upward toward constellations that seemed alive. For the priests who tended those flames, the magi of Zoroaster, the heavens were not cold. They were a battlefield of spirits. Stars moved like soldiers, planets marched with purpose, and every unexpected light was a message from powers greater than men. Among these lights, one name whispered louder than the rest: Gautier, the tail star. To later generations, it would sound like a comet, but to the Persians, it was no passive wanderer. It was a chained serpent of fire, a star of doom waiting for its hour. When it came, they said, it would descend toward the sun, pouring rivers of molten metal across the world. The righteous would walk through that flood unharmed. The wicked would be consumed. This was not astronomy. This was judgment written in flame. The prophecy survives in Zoroastrian texts like the Purification, which describes the creation of the world and its final renovation. There, Gautier is chained in the heavens, a weapon of destruction held back until the end. At the moment of the Frashokereti, the renewal of time, the serpent star will fall into the sea, releasing a blaze that burns away evil forever. It is both terror and promise. The death of the corrupt, the purification of the faithful, the cleansing of creation itself. Why did Persians imagine such a star? Part of the answer lies in their vision of the cosmos. Unlike some ancient traditions that saw time as an endless cycle, Zoroastrianism was linear. Creation had a beginning, history had a middle, and one day it would have an end. Yet within that line were battles, rehearsals, and warnings. Every eclipse, every unusual star, every fire tale was a rehearsal for the last act. And in this cosmic theatre, Gautier was cast as the serpent who would appear again and again until the final curtain fell. The serpent was no random choice. In Persian myth, serpents embodied chaos. The dragon, Ajidahaka, was the greatest of them, a monster of insatiable hunger who devoured flocks and poisoned the earth. To link a star to the image of a serpent was to link it with that chaos, living, watching, waiting. Gautier was not an impersonal force of nature. It was a cosmic enemy, kept in chains until the day it was unleashed. This belief had consequences for daily life. Fire temples, where priests tended eternal flames, became symbols of resistance against darkness. Each ember mirrored the cosmic fire that would one day pour from Gautier to cleanse the world. When comets flared across the night, people gathered at these temples, offering prayers, fearing that the serpent star had stirred. To the common people, a comet might look like a torch or a dragon. To the priests, it was a reminder that the prophecy was alive, that the heavens had not forgotten. Even kings were not immune. The Achaemenid emperors, who ruled from Persepolis and Susa, built their power on the claim that they served Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom. Yet when fiery stars appeared, they too consulted priests for guidance. The sky could overrule any throne. An emperor might command armies and build palaces, but if the tail star shook its chains, no mortal power could resist. Chronicles speak of droughts and famines following strange apparitions. Disasters folded into memory until prophecy and history became indistinguishable. The Persian fear of Gautier also fit into a broader worldview where the heavens were never silent. Each star had meaning. Some were Yazatas, divine beings who guarded the order of creation. Others were corrupted, serving demons like Az, the insatiable spirit of greed. Gautier was tied to Az, embodying her hunger. Just as greed consumed endlessly on Earth, so the serpent star circled endlessly above, threatening to fall when human corruption became too great. In this way, the comet was a mirror. It did not simply announce fate. It reflected mankind's own failings. This moral edge gave the prophecy its weight. The molten river of Gautier was not indiscriminate. It was a trial. The righteous would pass unharmed. The wicked would burn. Each generation lived with that looming judgment. When droughts struck, when harvests failed, when the heavens lit with a fire tail, people believed they were glimpsing the serpent shaking its bonds, testing the world. Other cultures feared comets, but Persia wove that fear into the very structure of time. The Babylonians recorded them as omens of plague. The Chinese saw them as inspectors sent by heaven. The Greeks spoke of fiery torches, but only the Persians built their prophecy around a serpent star that was chained, returning in cycles and destined to fall at the end of creation. Only they placed it at the heart of a cosmic war between truth and lie, order and chaos. And so the prophecy endured. Through the rise and fall of empires, through Alexander's conquest and Rome's expansion, Zoroastrian texts carried forward the warning of Gautier. Priests copied it. Communities repeated it. Even when fire temples crumbled, the serpent star remained alive in memory. What makes it remarkable is not just the detail, but the persistence. For more than 2 millennia, people in Iran and beyond have told of a comet-like serpent that will one day return. And when modern astronomers watched the Three-Eye Atlas comet in 2025 writhe and flicker as it fell toward the sun, the echo was too strong to ignore. To the scientist, the comet was a fragment of ice. To the historian, it was the mirror of an ancient fear. And to the Persians who first named the tail star, it was the reminder that the heavens are not passive. They are chained with secrets, and one day the chains will break. The prophecy ends not in despair, but in renewal. After Gotia falls, after the molten rivers scour the world, creation is restored. Evil is gone forever. The faithful remain. The serpent burns, but life goes on purified. For a people who believed history had an end, this was not just doom. It was hope, carved into the sky. That hope is what makes the prophecy compelling even now. Because if the Persians saw Gotia once, perhaps they were remembering a real comet blazing across their skies. Perhaps they were not only imagining, but recording. And if they were right that it would return, then every fiery visitor is part of that story. Another glimpse of the serpent star circling back, keeping watch. So the fire altars burned, the priests recited their hymns, and the people of Persia lived under a sky they believed was alive. Gotia waited there, chained, patient. And when it came again, the world would face its trial. To the Persians, the heavens were never silent. Every star was alive with meaning, every comet a messenger. When they spoke of Gotia, the tail star, they did not describe an empty fragment drifting through the void. They described a chained serpent waiting for the appointed hour. That language reveals something deeper than fear of fire. It reveals the conviction that Gotia was not just an event. It was a watcher. In Zoroastrian thought, the universe was divided between the forces of truth and lie, order and chaos. Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, ruled creation, but his adversary Angra Mainyu spread deceit and ruin. Humanity stood in the middle of this struggle, their choices tipping the balance. The stars above were not neutral backdrops to the fight. They were actors in it. Some, called Yazatas, were guardians of truth, shining steadily in their courses. Others were tainted, bound to demons, their fire carrying the presence of destruction. Gotia was counted among the latter. Texts link the serpent star with Az, the demon of greed. Az devours endlessly, wealth, cattle, men, gold, even time itself, yet is never full. She is hunger incarnate. To say that Gotia was her dwelling was to brand it as a cosmic predator. Its fiery body was not random. It circled above the world in envy, watching, waiting for the hour when chains would break and hunger would fall. This association gave the prophecy a moral edge. Gotia was not destruction for its own sake. It was destruction invited by human failure. Every act of greed, every hoarded treasure, every injustice strengthened Az, and by extension, the serpent star bound to her. In this way, the comet became a mirror. It looked down upon humanity, marking their excess, their arrogance, their betrayals. When the world had tipped too far, when corruption outweighed truth, then, and only then, would the serpent fall. For the Persians, this meant that the heavens themselves were keeping account. The sky was not just above them, it was above them with judgment. To look up at Gotia was to feel an eye upon you, cold and patient, biding its time. Other cultures shared in this vision of comets as conscious. The Babylonians saw them as torches of Nergal, the god of plague and war. sent to inspect the earth before calamity. The Chinese called them broom stars, sweeping corruption from under heaven's gaze. Imperial astronomers recorded their shapes with precision, for each twist of the tail was considered a message. If it bent toward the palace, it was the emperor himself under watch. If it swept across the provinces, it meant rebellion or famine. The Greeks, too, saw comets as signs, heavenly messengers whose sudden arrival meant the gods had fixed their attention upon mortals. Yet the Persians sharpened this instinct further. They did not merely say that comets observed. They said that Gotia was chained, bound like a beast waiting for the signal to strike. This was not a casual gaze. It was deliberate surveillance, purposeful waiting. The Serpent star was a sentinel of chaos, a cosmic spy restrained until the end of time. The Bundahishan describes it vividly, the tail star hanging in the sky, filled with demons, dwelling in the constellations like a fortress of ruin. To imagine such a star was to imagine not a flicker of light, but an intelligence, a presence that could act when unleashed. To stand under such a sky was to live with the certainty that humanity was being watched and judged every night. This conviction touched politics as well as faith. When comets flared, kings grew uneasy. The Achaemenid rulers, masters of a vast empire, commanded armies and treasuries, but they could not command the sky. If priests declared that a fire tail above was the serpent star stirring, then even the great king trembled. Royal campaigns could be delayed, sacrifices ordered, reforms enacted, all to appease the heavens. The watcher in the sky was not only a threat for the end of time, it could sway decisions in the present. For ordinary Persians, too, the serpent star loomed. Farmers feared that its glare would wither their crops. Merchants feared that its fire would ruin trade. Families gathered at fire temples when strange lights appeared, asking priests to intercede, to pray that the chain held firm for another year. Everyone lived under the same gaze, rich and poor alike. The idea that a comet could hold intelligence may seem strange to us, but in a world without artificial light, the stars were overwhelming. A sky filled with millions of points of fire did not look indifferent. It looked alive. And when one of those points flared into a torch or a serpent's tail, it seemed impossible that it was mere accident. To the ancients, such a vision had to mean something. It had to belong to someone. This is why Persia's vision of Gotia stands out. Other peoples saw comets as portents. The Persians saw one comet in particular as a chained enemy, actively observing the world, waiting for release. In that belief lies a kind of cosmic paranoia, but also a cosmic logic. If the world was a battlefield between truth and lie, then the sky must be filled with witnesses. Some cheered for order, some plotted for ruin. And Gotia, the serpent star, was the most dangerous of them all. In that sense, the prophecy was less about fire than about presence. The Molten River was the finale, yes, but the real terror was the waiting. To know that above your head, every night, was an intelligence bound in light. That was the true weight of the prophecy. And it gave the Persians something else, a sense of inevitability. If the serpent star was chained, then history itself was chained with it. No matter how long the empire lasted, no matter how great its kings, one day the chain would break. The sky would act. The watcher would fall. For centuries, this conviction endured. Priests taught it. Kings feared it. Communities lived with it. Even when Persia fell to Alexander, when the fire temples were desecrated and the old rituals suppressed, the prophecy lived on in memory and in text. Gautier remained above, its gaze unbroken. And that is what makes the Persian prophecy more than superstition. It was a way of understanding history itself, not as random, but as observed. Humanity was not alone. The serpent star was there, keeping count, waiting. The watchers in the sky were real. Far above the palaces of Persepolis, the stars spread like a silver canopy. Traders along the royal roads whispered of signs they had seen on their journeys. Strange lights in the sky, serpents of fire, stars that seemed to fall and burn. For the Persians, these were not passing curiosities. They were fragments of memory, pieces of a larger pattern that stretched across generations. And in the center of those memories loomed Gautier, the tail star. In Persian imagination, the serpent star was not a one-time visitor. It had come before, leaving scars upon the land, and it would come again. Priests told of droughts that had lasted for years, of fields cracked and harvests withered, of rivers running thin while the heavens glowed with a terrible light. To the faithful, these disasters were not accidents. They were the work of the chained serpent shaking its bonds, sending fragments of itself to test humanity. Some stories spoke of a star so bright it was seen even in the daytime, its tail stretching from horizon to horizon. People gathered in marketplaces and temple courtyards to watch in awe and terror. The priests lifted their voices in chants, reminding all who listened that this was Gautier's shadow, a foretaste of the final fire. Such visions lodged deep in memory. They were not easily forgotten. Across centuries, these memories hardened into prophecy. The Bundahishan described the serpent star bound in the constellations, a stronghold of demons waiting for release. When it fell, it would ignite the seas into molten metal. Yet the text also recalled its earlier appearances, disasters that had already marked the world. What the Persians preserved as sacred tradition may well have begun as eyewitness accounts of blazing comets that shook the skies of antiquity. The Persians were not alone in recording such spectacles. Babylonian scribes carved cometary portents into clay, while Greek poets described fiery stars trailing hair like women, torches carried by the gods. But in Persia, these lights were always woven into the greater struggle of truth and lie. A comet was never just an omen. It was a combatant, a serpent whose fire was bound to return. Imagine a night when such a comet burned over the empire. On the terraces of Persepolis, nobles shaded their eyes against its brilliance. In the countryside, shepherds pointed from the hills to the sky, their flocks restless under the glow. Merchants halted their caravans, staring upward as the fire tail blazed across the heavens. For a civilization so attuned to the language of the stars, such a sight would feel less like nature and more like revelation. Those memories would be passed down, embroidered into prophecy, until the comet was no longer a fleeting star, but a cosmic personality, a chained dragon that waited for its time. By the Sasanian age, centuries after the Achaemenids, the serpent star was a fixed presence in Zoroastrian theology, a certainty about the end of time. It was not speculation. It was destiny. Modern astronomers, tracing the orbits of comets, now speak of a vast body that once broke apart, its children known as the Kreutz sun grazers. More than 4,000 fragments have been seen, each one plunging close to the sun, flaring brilliantly and then disintegrating in fire. To science, they are evidence of a long-ago catastrophe in the heavens. To history, they may be the very lights that Persians remembered as Gautier's shadows. The thought is unsettling. A single massive comet shattering in antiquity, its fragments returning again and again in cycles. How different is that from the Persian belief in a serpent star that visits judges, and promises to return. Two ways of telling the same story, one in the language of astronomy, the other in the language of myth. When we read the Persian texts, when we hear of a chained serpent whose fragments brought disaster, we may be hearing the memory of that original shattering, preserved not in equations, but in prophecy. The priests, watching the sky blaze, would not have spoken of orbital mechanics. They would have spoken of chains breaking, of demons loosed, of fire sent to test the world, and in that telling, the science of fragments became the theology of Gautier. Even now, the Kreutz family continues to fall. Small fragments flare every few decades, brief apparitions that burn and vanish. Larger ones return every few centuries, casting tales that stretch across the sky. Each appearance echoes the Persian conviction that the serpent star does not die. It only withdraws. It circles back. It waits. For the Persians, this pattern confirmed their belief that time itself was watched and measured. No disaster came without meaning. No fire fell without purpose. If the heavens rained fragments, it was because the serpent star was stirring, reminding humanity of its chains. And so, the prophecy of Gautier was more than fear. It was memory transfigured into destiny, astronomy recast as theology. To the priests who fed the fire altars, to the kings who ruled beneath vast skies, to the farmers who trembled at drought, Gautier was real. They had seen its fragments before. They would see them again. The story of the Kreutz sungrazers belongs to modern science, but the story of Gautier belongs to ancient Persia, and between them lies a bridge across time, where fragments of fire become dragons in prophecy, and shattered comets become chained serpents in the imagination of a people who looked to the sky and saw their fate written in flame. For the people of ancient Persia, the serpent star was never meant to remain chained forever. One day it would break loose, and when it did, the sky itself would seem to collapse in fire. Priests warned that when Gautier fell, its body would pour across the heavens like a river of molten metal, searing the earth, testing the hearts of men and women alike. To them, this was not metaphor. It was destiny. The texts speak with terrifying clarity. Gautier would rush toward the sun, its tail writhing like a serpent's body in agony. Its fire would melt mountains, consume cities, and leave behind a flood not of water, but of glowing metal, a sea of liquid fire rolling across the earth. Through that torrent, all humanity would be forced to walk. The righteous, purified like gold, would pass unharmed. The wicked, like dross, would be burned away. In that furnace, the final difference between truth and lie would be revealed. Such imagery was not distant to the Persians. Fire was already the heart of their worship. In the temples, sacred flames were fed night and day, never allowed to die. Fire was purity, the visible face of truth itself. Yet fire was also danger, consuming, uncontrollable, divine and destructive at once. To imagine the serpent star falling was to imagine the temple flame magnified 1,000-fold, spilling from heaven to earth, purifying everything in its path. Stories circulated of earlier disasters that hinted at this final blaze. Chroniclers spoke of droughts that lasted years, when the skies glowed red and crops shriveled. They told of sudden stars that flared across the heavens, their tails so vast they stretched from horizon to horizon. To later generations, these memories became proof that Gautier had stirred before, fragments of its body breaking free, reminders of the greater trial to come. The fear was universal. A sudden comet was never just a curiosity. It was a warning. Farmers feared that their fields would not survive the serpent's breath. Merchants worried that trade routes would dry up, that caravans would cross deserts under a cursed sky. Kings feared most of all, for the Serpent's fall was no respecter of crowns. A great king of Persia could command armies and build palaces, but he could not command the heavens. If Gotyea shook its bonds, even the mightiest empire would be judged. In the Zoroastrian vision of time, this judgment was inescapable. The Frashokereti, the final renovation, could not arrive without it. The Serpent star was not an accident of the cosmos. It was part of the script of history, written from the beginning. The priests declared that the Molten River would come whether men were ready or not. All that remained was to live righteously, so that when the fire came, one could walk through it untouched. Such belief carried both terror and hope. For the wicked, the prophecy was doom, but for the faithful, it was liberation. After the serpent fell, after the fire burned, creation would be renewed. The world would be cleansed of evil, restored to the purity it held at the dawn of time. The serpent's fall was catastrophe, yes, but catastrophe with purpose. This paradox, fire as both destroyer and purifier, shaped Persian ritual life. When sacred fires were tended in the temples, when hymns were recited to the flames, worshippers knew that these were only shadows of the greater fire to come. Every spark was a rehearsal. Every ember was a reminder. One day the true flame would fall from the sky. Imagine the dread when a comet blazed overhead, its tail lashing across the night. Villagers gathered outside, staring upward in silence, children clutching their parents' hands. Priests stood at the altars, chanting against the darkness, reminding the people that such signs had been foretold. Each appearance was both a terror and a comfort, a glimpse of the serpent, but also proof that the prophecy was real. When modern astronomers saw the III Atlas in 2025 break into fragments and flare in a final burst of fire, the echo was unmistakable. To the scientist, it was fragile ice undone by the sun. To the historian, it was the serpent falling exactly as the Persians had described. A body writhing, melting, scattering into rivers of flame before vanishing into darkness. The Persians would not have been surprised. They had already said it. The serpent star does not move by chance. It shakes its chains, it falls, it burns, and then it withdraws until the next appointed time. Each fiery visitor was not the end, but a rehearsal for the end. And that is why the prophecy endures. Because even as empires rose and fell, even as new faiths spread across the land, the vision of the serpent's fall still haunted the imagination. It was too vivid to vanish, too powerful to forget. Gotyea remained above, chained but restless. A reminder that history itself was incomplete until the serpent came down. In the silence of the Persian desert, with fire altars glowing against the night, one could almost believe it was already stirring. The stars seemed to shiver, the sky seemed to watch, and the memory of fiery comets past whispered that the serpent had only paused, not ended. When it falls, the texts declare, the world will walk through fire, gold will gleam brighter, dross will burn away, and after the flames, creation will stand renewed. This was the heart of the prophecy. The serpent's fall was terror, but also triumph. It was death, but also life. For the Persians, this was enough to live by, to tend the sacred flames, to act with truth, to resist the lie. These were not small duties. They were preparation. They were the only way to stand when the fire-tailed serpent uncoiled across the heavens and poured its molten river across the earth. And so the prophecy held them, generation after generation, empire after empire. a promise that above the stars a chained serpent waited, and when it fell, the world would know its trial. According to the teachings of Zoroaster, the end of time unfolds as a test rather than a downfall. The serpent star falls, molten fire engulfs the world, and humanity faces its greatest separation. The righteous pass through the blaze as though wading through warm milk, shielded by their virtue, while the wicked are burned beyond endurance. Within that ordeal lies the moment of final judgment. Persian priests describe the scene with unsettling detail. The metal of the mountains will melt and flow like rivers. Seas of liquid fire will roll across valleys and plains. All mankind will be forced to cross those rivers. No wall will stand against them. No cave will hide from them. The fire will reach every corner of creation, and in its heat, the truth of every soul will be revealed. For the Persians, this was not allegory. It was the destiny of history itself. Their world was framed by dualism, Asher, truth and order, set against Druj, the lie. Every choice in life tipped the balance between them. But at the end of days, the balance would no longer be hidden. The molten river would expose it for all to see. This conviction gave Persian religion a practical sharpness. Morality was not only about pleasing gods or following tradition. It was survival training for the fire to come, to tell the truth, to act justly, to tend the sacred flame. These were not abstract virtues. They were shields against the molten torrent that awaited. A man might lie to his neighbor, cheat a merchant, or exploit the poor. But when Gautier fell and the fire spread, he would be unable to lie his way across the river. The flames would know. The image also explains why fire was so central in Zoroastrian worship. Temples did not house statues. They housed flames, tended carefully by priests, guarded day and night. To gaze into the sacred fire was to look upon the same power that would one day pour from the heavens. To honor it was to prepare for its final descent. Every ember, every ritual offering was a rehearsal for the trial. In the Bundahishn, the molten river is not only punishment, it is cleansing. Just as goldsmiths refine metal by fire, burning away impurities, so too the final blaze will refine creation. The righteous will emerge purified, the wicked consumed, and the world itself restored to its original perfection. In this sense, the purification test was not doom, it was hope. The serpent star's fall was terrible, yes, but its flames were also the last tool of restoration. Other cultures echoed this belief in fire as a judge. Babylonian omens spoke of stars that heralded plagues to cleanse cities of corruption. In Jewish apocalyptic visions, fire from heaven devours the enemies of God. In early Christian texts, a lake of fire swallows the unjust. Yet none spoke with the vividness of the Persian river of molten metal, a trial every man and woman would face personally, with no exception. The universality of the test mattered. Kings and peasants alike would wade the same flames. Wealth could not protect, armies could not defend. The greatest monarch of Persia would stand shoulder to shoulder with the humblest shepherd. In that fire, all masks would melt away. Only truth would endure. The belief shaped society. Kings were expected to rule with justice, for their crowns would not protect them from the flames. Merchants were urged to deal honestly, lest their wealth become fuel for their burning. Families were taught to keep the sacred flame alive in their homes, a small defense against the greater fire to come. Daily life became a preparation for cosmic judgment. It also gave comfort. For those who suffered under injustice, the molten river was assurance that evil would not escape forever. The greedy might hoard wealth, The corrupt might prosper, but when the serpent star fell, all accounts would be settled. The fire would see what men could not. It would expose, divide, and cleanse. One can imagine the power of this belief when a comet blazed across the sky. Villages staring upward at a fire tail would not see a random streak of light. They would see a rehearsal of the trial. Mothers whispered to their children that the righteous had nothing to fear. Men gathered at temples, offering prayers that they would endure the fire when it came. The comet was not only a watcher, it was a preview of the purification to come. When III Atlas in 2025 broke apart in bursts of fire, the resemblance to the prophecy was uncanny. Modern observers saw fragments scattering into solar winds, but in the ancient texts, the serpent star too sheds fire in pieces, boiling and thrashing before it falls. Each flare is a spark of the greater fire, a warning of the molten river yet to come. For the Persians, the test was both individual and cosmic. Each person faced it alone, yet all creation faced it together. The molten flood would sweep mountains, seas, and skies, leaving nothing untouched. Afterward, the world would rise renewed, cleansed of corruption, restored to harmony. Evil would be gone forever. The righteous would inherit creation. It is a vision at once terrifying and beautiful. Terrifying because it promised fire so vast that oceans would boil and mountains melt. Beautiful because beyond that fire lay perfection, the world remade. The serpent star was not only death, it was rebirth. To live in Persia was to live beneath this prophecy. Every flame in the temple, every comet in the sky, every drought or disaster could be folded into it. All were reminders of the test ahead. And so the people waited, not passively, but with vigilance, keeping fires, telling truths, resisting lies, all to be ready for the moment when the chains of Gotyur would break. The prophecy did not allow escape. All must walk the molten river. All must be tested. Yet within that inevitability lay certainty. Evil would not win. Greed would not rule forever. The serpent star's fire would see to that. Across generations, the serpent star refused to fade into silence. Elders remembered nights when the sky glowed with fire, and their memories became the lessons of priests, then the warnings of texts. Each comet was not seen as a stranger, but as the return of something already known. The chained dragon, Gotyur, stirring again above the world. In Persia, time was not endless. It had a beginning, it would have an end, and between the two, it moved toward judgment. But within that line, the world pulsed with cycles. Summer returned, winter returned, dynasties rose and fell, and the serpent star blazed across the heavens more than once. To the faithful, every fiery visitor was another appearance of the same chained serpent, shaking its bonds, reminding humankind that it still waited above. Old tales spoke of droughts that lasted for years, when the sky burned red and rivers withered under a hostile sun. Priests remembered these disasters and said that Gotyur had stirred then. Some recalled a comet so vast it outshone the moon, its tail sweeping across the horizon, leaving villages in awe and terror. For the next generation, that single night of fire became a legend, a story of the serpent's return. When such stories were retold in the fire temples, they were not described as accidents. They were warnings, fragments of a greater pattern. The serpent did not fall all at once. It shook pieces of itself free, sending them down to remind the living that the end was written into the heavens. Memory gave the prophecy its power. A comet might blaze for a few weeks, but memory lasted lifetimes. Fathers told their sons, mothers warned their daughters, priests preached to congregations. We have seen the serpent before, and we will see it again. In this way, the fear of Gochiha never dimmed. Even when the sky was calm, people believed that the Watcher was still chained above, waiting for its next descent. The repetition made the prophecy undeniable. A single fiery visitor could be dismissed as chance. But when comets came again and again, each leaving its mark on history, each folded into the memory of famine, war, or drought, the conviction deepened. The serpent was not myth. The serpent was fact. It had returned before. It would return again. On nights when the heavens flared, villages gathered in silence. Shepherds on the steppe pointed at the fiery tail, their flocks restless beneath it. Merchants halted their caravans on the royal roads, gazing upward as the comet burned. In cities, kings summoned their priests to read the meaning. Always the verdict was the same. This was not a new star, but the serpent star itself, reminding mankind of its chains. This cycle gave the prophecy its permanence. Even in long centuries when no great comet blazed, the fear did not vanish. Memory bridged the gap. Story carried the flame. The serpent might slumber for a generation, but its watchers on earth never forgot. When the sky finally lit again, the people were ready with the old words, Gochier has returned. Other civilizations also spoke of comets repeating their visits. Babylonian scribes carved records of fiery stars that returned to herald plagues and wars. Chinese astronomers kept careful logs of broom stars, noting that they swept across the sky century after century, each time linked to imperial crisis. In Greece, poets remembered comets appearing before the deaths of rulers. Yet Persia gave this repetition a unique twist. To them, the comets were not many. They were one, the same serpent star, bound but restless, circling back to test humanity. The Bundahishan captures this conviction. It says that Gochier hangs above the constellations, shaking its bonds, casting fragments down until the appointed moment when it will fall completely. What astronomers today describe as the cycle of cometary fragments, the Persians described as the serpent star breaking pieces of itself to remind the world of its coming fire. The language is different. The pattern is the same. To live under this prophecy was to live in constant readiness. A farmer who looked up at a comet did not see a harmless spectacle. He saw the serpent's eye fixed on him once more. A king who saw its tail stretch across the heavens did not admire its beauty. He felt the weight of judgment over his empire. Each return brought the same conclusion. The serpent watches, the serpent waits, the serpent will return again. The idea seeped into Persian thought in every direction. Poets used it to warn of the dangers of greed and arrogance. Priests used it to remind congregations of the necessity of truth and fire. Kings used it to humble themselves before Ahura Mazda, knowing that even the greatest monarch would one day face the molten river. The serpent star was more than a comet. It was the heartbeat of history itself. Even after Persia's empires fell, the belief endured. In Sasanian times, centuries after the Achaemenids, the prophecy of Gochier remained central. Fire temples still told of the serpent's return. Communities still watched the sky with the same dread. Even when new faiths rose and new rulers reigned, the chain of memory was unbroken. The serpent had returned before. It would return again. That cycle gave the prophecy its haunting strength. Gochier was never gone. It was only waiting. A chain could rattle without breaking. A serpent could writhe without falling. Each fragment of fire in the heavens, each disaster folded into memory, was proof that the Watcher still hung above, patient as the stars themselves. And that is why the prophecy was never forgotten. It did not depend on a single comet blazing once in a distant age. It depended on the cycle, the repetition that confirmed its truth across generations. A fire tale here, a famine there, a drought remembered, a comet recorded. Each piece was folded into the larger story until all were seen as one. The serpent star, eternal, returning, chained but restless. The Persians knew that one day the cycle would end in the final fall, the molten river, the cleansing of the world. But until that day, they believed. The serpent would keep returning, shaking its chains, sending fragments, reminding humankind that judgment was still to come. And so, when the sky blazed with comets, they did not see beginnings. They saw reminders. The serpent had returned, as it always did, and as it always would, until the day the chains broke at last. Some nights in history carried visions so immense they seemed to cleave the heavens. Babylonian, Greek, and Chinese sources recall comets whose tails stretched across the whole horizon, shining with a brilliance greater than the stars, burning even in the daylight sky. To the people who saw them, these were no accidents of nature. They were revelations in the firmament. Persia, too, must have known such a night. Long before the Purification was written, before the fire temples rose in Sasanian times, people looked up from the plains and mountains and saw a comet so great that it could not be forgotten. It burned itself into memory, not only as light, but as terror. And in that terror, the prophecy of Gochiur began. Imagine it, a sky unspoiled by smoke or city lamps, where every star blazed with clarity. Then, without warning, a comet appeared, brighter than Venus, its tail spanning the vault of the heavens. Nights turned to fire. Days seemed to carry a second sun. Animals grew restless. Birds fell silent. People gathered in courtyards and temples, staring upward as though the sky itself had become alive. The Persians would not have mistaken such a sight for chance. They lived in a cosmos of meaning, where every star was part of the struggle between truth and lie. A serpent tail across the heavens could only belong to the forces of chaos. Priests named it, chained it, placed it in the great story of creation. What astronomers now call a fragmenting giant, they called the serpent star, Gochiur. The memory of such a comet was not kept in numbers or charts. It was kept in ritual and story. Priests told of rivers running thin, of famines that followed in its wake. Kings recorded years of hardship, blaming the fire in the heavens. Each retelling pushed the comet further from history into prophecy, until it became not a past event, but a future certainty. Other peoples did the same. The Babylonians tied their greatest comets to Nergal, the god of war. The Chinese called them broom stars, sweeping the world clean of corruption. The Greeks spoke of fiery swords that brought down dynasties. Everywhere, memory turned into myth. But in Persia, the comet became more than omen. It became destiny, a chained serpent that would return until the world was remade. Modern astronomers speak of the Kreutz sun grazers, a family of comets, all fragments of a single immense body that broke apart long ago. Each fragment follows a path that carries it close to the sun, where it flares in brilliance and then burns away. More than 4,000 such fragments have been recorded. To science, they are reminders of a catastrophe in antiquity. To Persia, they were proof that the serpent star never died. If the Persians witnessed one of those great fragments, a comet that lit the world for weeks, casting fire across the sky, it would explain the vividness of their prophecy. They did not imagine a serpent. They saw one uncoiling in fire above their heads. They did not invent a molten river. They remembered the droughts, the scorching heat, the harvests that failed after the comet's passage. Memory supplied the facts. Prophecy supplied the meaning. Such an event would echo for generations. Elders would tell of the year the serpent filled the heavens. Priests would remind the people that it was chained but restless. And when another comet appeared, lesser but still bright, it would be woven into the same story. The serpent has returned. By the time the texts were written, centuries later, the memory had hardened into certainty. Gautier was no longer a comet of the past. It was the comet of the future. This is how history becomes prophecy. A single night of fire, a single season of drought, retold again and again, becomes a cosmic law. The comet that once terrified shepherds and kings became the serpent star chained in the heavens, destined to fall at the end of time. Even now, the parallel is striking. Astronomers trace the Kreutz family back to a parent body that broke apart millennia ago. Persians spoke of a serpent star that shattered, shedding fragments, returning in cycles, waiting for the final fall. Two languages, one pattern. One calls it orbital mechanics. The other calls it destiny. What matters for the story is not which is correct, but how the Persians remembered. They saw a great comet once, perhaps more than once, and they wove its fire into the fabric of time. The serpent star became a symbol that no drought, no famine, no disaster could erase. And so when later comets appeared, whether faint or dazzling, they were not isolated events. They were reminders of the great original. Each fragment was the serpent shaking its chains. Each fiery visitor was proof that Gautier was still above, waiting. The great original comet, whatever it was, whenever it came, gave the prophecy its shape. It gave the Persians their serpent star, their molten river, their chained watcher. Without it, the Bundahishan might never have spoken of Gautier. With it, the prophecy became one of the most haunting visions of the ancient world. A memory transformed into fate. Zoroastrianism took shape as a religion of power and struggle. Every earthly flame was bound to the movement of the cosmos, each fire a reflection of the larger order at stake. To live as a Persian within Zoroaster's vision was to dwell inside a story of eternal contest, the unbroken struggle of Asher, truth and order, against Druja, the lie and chaos. Within this contest loomed the serpent star, Gautier, feared above all, for its descent heralded the final trial of fire. Daily life unfolded under this belief. In cities and villages alike, fire temples burned as the beating heart of Zoroastrian devotion. These temples did not hold idols. They held fire, sacred, eternal, never allowed to go out. Priests, the Magi, tended it day and night, feeding it with clean wood, protecting it from impurity. For Persians, that flame was not a symbol. It was the living face of truth itself, a fragment of Ahura Mazda's light brought into the world. To stand before it was to stand before the force that would one day pour across the earth when Gautier fell. The Magi were more than caretakers of flame. They were teachers, judges, interpreters of signs. In times of drought, when rivers shrank and fields cracked, they reminded the people that the serpent star was stirring. In moments of plenty, they warned against pride. For as the demon of greed was always feeding, and her weapon was Gautier. To cheat a neighbor, to hoard grain, to lie in business. These were not small sins. They were sparks that fed the serpent above. Kings relied on the Magi as well. The Achaemenid emperors, who ruled lands from the Indus to the Aegean, styled themselves as servants of Ahura Mazda. guardians of truth on earth. In their palaces at Persepolis and Susa, fire burned in golden basins, tended by priests. Before campaigns, kings consulted the stars and the sacred hymns. If the Magi warned that omens pointed to the serpent's stirring, armies waited, sacrifices were offered, and decrees were delayed. The fate of empires bent under the weight of the prophecy. Communities carried the same burden. A Persian family rose with prayers to the dawn fire, recited blessings over meals, and ended the day with hymns to the hearth flame. When omens darkened the sky, rituals of purification spread. Men and women bathed, fasted, and confessed sins, preparing themselves for the molten river that would one day come. These acts were not superstition. They were preparation for survival, the only defense against fire that would test every soul. Zoroastrian teaching was not confined to Persians alone. The Achaemenid Empire encompassed many peoples: Elamites, Medes, Babylonians, Greeks of Ionia, and Jews newly returned from Babylonian exile. All lived under the shadow of Persian rule, and all came into contact with Persian beliefs. Travelers on the royal roads carried stories of the Serpent star far beyond the Iranian plateau. Babylonian scribes, long used to reading omens in the sky, absorbed Persian teachings about the final trial. Jews in exile heard of a coming renovation of the world and a judgment by fire, echoes that later shaped apocalyptic visions in the Hebrew scriptures. The approach to fire, then, was not only Persian, it was imperial. Subjects across thousands of miles learned that the world was moving toward a final blaze. The language differed. Babylon might speak of Nergal, Greece of fiery torches, Judea of a day of judgment, but the rhythm was the same. The heavens carried memory, and one day that memory would fall in fire. Within Persia itself, the anticipation of that fire marked every level of society. Farmers who labored under the sun knew that their harvests could be undone by drought, and believed that the serpent above was partly to blame. Merchants traveling through deserts carried small portable fire altars, hoping to keep the truth alive on the road. For even trade was judged under the gaze of Gochir. Soldiers invoked the fire before battle, believing that to fight under truth was to fight with protection when the molten river came. What made Zoroastrianism unique was its insistence that the trial was universal. No one was spared. A shepherd in Bactria and a king in Persepolis would both walk through the same flames. Wealth could not buy safety. Birth could not guarantee survival. All that mattered was truth against the lie. In this way, the faith leveled the world even as it organized it. The poorest man who clung to Ashur was stronger than the richest king who served Druge. And so, when fiery omens blazed across the heavens, Persians did not see them as curiosities. They saw them as reminders, not reminders of destruction alone, but reminders of the need to live righteously, to tend the fire, to honor the truth. Each comet, each drought, each sign was folded into the same story. The serpent star waits. The fire is coming, and only the righteous will endure. The influence of this world view was immense. Greek historians who visited Persia marveled at how seriously the Magi took omens and rituals. Later, Jewish writings adopted images of cosmic fire and judgment that bear Persian fingerprints. Early Christian visions of apocalypse, with their lakes of fire and final tests, echo the molten river of the Bundahishan. Even when empires fell and religions shifted, the Persian story of fire endured, reshaped but never forgotten. The approach to fire, then, was not only a matter of comets in the sky. It was a matter of life in the empire. Every act, every ritual, every law carried within it the shadow of the final blaze. Persians did not wait passively for the serpent's fall. They lived daily in its anticipation, ordering their world so that when the fire came, they might walk through it unharmed. This was how Zoroastrianism prepared its people, not with promises of escape, but with demands for truth. To follow Asher was to stand ready. To fall into Druj was to be consumed. The serpent star, chained above the constellations, watched as judge. Its fire would come, not to erase creation, but to purify it. And when that fire fell, the Persians believed only those who had lived in truth would stand. Persian storytellers spoke often of serpents, the dragon Ajidahaka, chained beneath a mountain, waiting for the day he would rise again. The demon Az, feeding endlessly, devouring wealth, cattle, and men without ever being filled. Serpents, in Persian thought, were never harmless. They were the shapes chaos wore, twisting forms that embodied hunger and ruin. And above them all, in the words of priests, was Gochia, not a fireside tale, but a terror named in the scriptures, the serpent star whose coils would one day unwind. In the Bundahishan, Gochia is described as dwelling in the constellations, a stronghold of demons chained in place. It is not motionless. It writhes, stretches, pulls at its bonds. Priests warned that each disaster on earth was a sign of its struggle above. Droughts, famines, strange lights in the heavens, all could be explained as the serpent uncoiling, not yet loose, but restless. The imagery of twisting coils gave a language to disaster. The earth shook because the serpent pulled. The skies glowed because its scales flared. This was not distant theology. It was spoken in fire temples where the Magi fed the eternal flames. Worshippers stood in courtyards, repeating hymns that declared truth stronger than chaos. The priests reminded them that the serpent stirred whenever the lie grew strong, when greed spread, when injustice ruled, when the fire of truth was neglected. Every ritual act was linked to the serpent. To lie in business was not simply to cheat a neighbor. It was to add strength to the coil above. To neglect the hearth fire was not laziness. It was to weaken the chains holding the serpent star in place. The moral force of the serpent uncoiling reached into households. Parents warned children that deceit fed the dragon in the sky. Farmers were told that unjust weights in the market drew its attention. Even gossip could be condemned as another turn of its coil. The prophecy was not only cosmic, it was personal. Each act of Druj, the lie, made the serpent stronger. Each act of Asher, truth and order, tightened the chain again. In the royal courts, the image was just as powerful. The great kings of Persia bore titles that proclaimed them chosen of Ahura Mazda, defenders of order on earth. Yet even they could not escape the serpent. When unrest stirred in the provinces, when famine followed poor harvests, Magi warned that the coils of Gochiur were tightening. Kings listened carefully, for they knew that an empire was judged not only by men, but by the heavens. A ruler who indulged greed or cruelty risked not only rebellion, but cosmic exposure. If the serpent uncoiled, his throne would not protect him. The imagery of coils and chains had deep resonance in Persian culture. Their myths often ended not in triumph, but in binding. Heroes chained Ajidahaka beneath a mountain, but only for a time. The serpent star, too, was bound, but only until the appointed hour. To bind was not to destroy. It was to delay. This way of thinking shaped how Persians understood evil itself. It was not gone, only restrained, waiting for the moment when its coils would be loosed again. Stories of the serpent circulated at every level. In villages, Storytellers reminded listeners of years when fire had seemed to burn in the sky. They said it was Gautier, stretching its coils, trying its bonds. In towns, priests told congregations that every new disaster was proof that the serpent had stirred. Even in times of peace, the serpent star gave Persians a way of understanding why suffering returned. Just as coils circle and circle without end, so too chaos was always twisting back into the world. Neighboring cultures told their own serpent tales. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat was cut in two to form the heavens. In Greece, Python was slain by Apollo at Delphi. In Israel, the serpent of Eden whispered deceit. But Persia's serpent was different, for it was not only myth, it was prophecy. It was not confined to the past. It lived above them, chained, yet visible, its return inevitable. Where others told of serpents slain, Persia told of a serpent uncoiling still. The ritual life of Zoroastrians made the serpent ever present. Every prayer to fire was also a prayer against the serpent. Every hymn to Asher was a tightening of the chain. Every fast and confession was another way of weakening its coils. In this sense, Persians lived in constant dialogue with the serpent star, even when it was invisible. The prophecy was not only about the end of time, it was about the battle of every day. The fear of the serpent's uncoiling also shaped Persian law and ethics. The emphasis on truthfulness, on fairness in trade, on justice in governance, all were enforced not only by royal decree, but by cosmic fear. To act unjustly was to ally with the serpent. To tell the truth was to resist its coils. The uncoiling was both a warning and a weapon of social control, reminding all that their deeds tightened or loosened the bonds of chaos. And so the serpent lived not only in temples and texts, but in markets, fields, and homes. It lived in the way Persians explained disaster, in the way they raised children, in the way kings ruled. It lived in the fear that every lie gave the serpent another chance to twist free. The prophecy's power lay not in distant fire, but in daily life. Gautier did not need to appear in the sky to remind Persians of its presence. Its coils were imagined in every misfortune. Its chains rattled in every injustice. The serpent uncoiled in story and ritual long before it ever appeared as fire above. And when it did appear, blazing across the heavens, the people of Persia did not see a new star. They saw what they had always feared, the serpent uncoiling, stretching, promising that one day the chains would snap. When hunger stalked the Persian plateau, when rains failed or rivers shrank to trickles, people reached for explanations older than memory. It was said that the serpent star was thrashing in its bonds. When sickness spread through towns or caravans returned empty from distant markets, Magi told the faithful that Gautier had shaken itself above the constellations, and fragments of its power had struck the world. The breaking of the star was not a vision in the heavens. It was the lived reality of disaster on earth. The texts of Zoroastrianism gave a frame for these events. In the Bundahishn, Gautier is described as a stronghold of demons, chained yet restless, casting pieces of itself down. For Persians, every misfortune could be folded into that description. A poor harvest, a spreading fever, a year of famine. All could be explained as another thrash, another fragment, another reminder that the serpent had not been destroyed, only restrained. This way of thinking gave priests immense power. In fire temples, where eternal flames burned day and night, Magi interpreted disasters for anxious crowds. They did not describe random chance. They spoke of moral failure. Each lie told in the market, each act of greed by a nobleman, each injustice left unpunished was said to loosen the serpent's chains. The people were warned that the star above mirrored the world below. If society fractured, the heavens did too. Families responded with ritual. When famine threatened, they fasted, purified themselves, and confessed sins, believing that repentance could strengthen the bonds on the serpent. Mothers scolded children not only for misbehavior, but for feeding chaos itself. Fathers urged honesty in trade, reminding their sons that false weights in the market gave power to Az, the demon of greed, whose weapon was Gochir. Every small act of truth was imagined as another knot in the cosmic chain. For kings, the breaking of the star had deeper consequences. The Achaemenid emperors presented themselves as guardians of Asher, truth and order, against the forces of Druge, the lie. Their inscriptions proclaimed their devotion to Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom. Yet when disasters struck, the people whispered, had the king failed? Was the serpent thrashing because the empire had strayed from justice? This fear reached royal courts. Kings summoned magi to explain calamities. The priests often replied that the ruler must renew justice, punish corruption, and restore balance. A king who ignored such counsel risked not only unrest, but the suspicion that he had allied himself with Druge, giving strength to the serpent. In a land so vast, stretching from Egypt to the Indus, no ruler could afford such whispers. Thus, the prophecy of Gochir, though cosmic in scope, had immediate political weight. Persians were not unique in connecting disasters to celestial fragments. In Babylonia, scribes wrote that the splitting of stars foretold plague or the fall of cities. In Greece, historians claimed that fiery omens heralded the death of kings. In China, broom stars that burst apart were said to mirror corruption at court. Yet Persia gave these events a coherence that others lacked. Instead of many separate omens, they spoke of one serpent star, chained yet breaking, returning again and again. Every disaster belonged to it. That unity gave the prophecy extraordinary resilience. A plague in one century, a drought in another. Both could be explained as Gochir's thrash. The details did not matter. The story did. It said that the serpent never died, never disappeared, only broke in pieces, sending reminders until the final fall. The memory of such calamities lived long in communities. Elders told of years when famine had emptied granaries and people had prayed night and day in the fire temples. They said those were the years when the serpent had pulled hardest. The stories did not dwell on the heavens themselves, but on the hunger, grief, and survival that followed. Through these memories, every new hardship was woven into the same pattern. The serpent has broken before. It will break again. This worldview made Zoroastrian ethics more urgent. Truthfulness was not only a virtue, it was protection. Each lie was a crack in creation's order, another chance for the serpent to thrash. Each act of honesty was a stitch in the cosmic fabric, holding chaos at bay. Priests hammered this point in sermons. Disasters were not random, they were consequences. Humanity's moral weakness gave the serpent strength. Even the architecture of Persian worship reflected this struggle. Fire temples rose like fortresses, their flames tended with discipline. When disasters came, crowds filled them, bringing offerings, reciting hymns, seeking reassurance that the serpent would not break further. Rituals were weapons. To keep the fire alive was to resist the thrash. To recite the hymns was to bind the coils tighter. To let the flame die was to abandon the world to chaos. The breaking of the star also offered a way to explain history. Conquerors rose and fell, empires fractured, and the Persians themselves faced defeat at the hands of Alexander. Later generations could look back and say that these collapses were not only the work of men, they were signs that the serpent had thrashed again, shaking the bonds that held creation together. In this way, the prophecy outlived kingdoms. Each disaster confirmed it anew. The prophecy's endurance came from its adaptability. It did not predict one event. It predicted all events. Each fragment in the sky, each disaster on earth was proof. To a Persian farmer, the loss of a harvest was the serpent's scale falling. To a merchant, a plague closing the market was another coil twisting. To a king, rebellion in a province was another chain straining. All could be folded into the same story, and all were. That story was both terrifying and stabilizing. Terrifying because it said that chaos was always near, always thrashing, always threatening to break loose completely. Stabilizing because it gave meaning to suffering. No famine was random, no disaster meaningless. All were part of the serpent's struggle. All were steps toward the final purification. For Persians, then, the breaking of the star was not just a spectacle above. It was the explanation of life below, of hunger, injustice, rebellion, and collapse. It was the reminder that the world's wounds were not accidents. They were the serpent's thrash, the coils straining, the prophecy moving closer to its fulfillment. And so the prophecy endured. Disasters came and went. Empires rose and fell. But the serpent remained, chained yet restless. Every thrash reminded the faithful that the end was written, and that one day the serpent would not break in fragments. It would break free. The most haunting image in the Persian vision of the end was not the serpent itself, but what followed in its wake. When Gautier fell, the priests taught. The mountains would melt, and the world would be covered in a flood of molten metal. It would roll across valleys and plains, filling rivers, drowning cities, until all of creation was submerged in fire. This river was not mere destruction. It was a trial. Every man and woman would be forced to walk through it. For the righteous, it would be as gentle as warm milk. For the wicked, it would be agony, burning them to ash. The image was absolute. No one could hide. No king could build a wall high enough. No cave deep enough to escape. The molten river would find all, and in its heat, the truth of every soul would be revealed. The idea was rooted in the Zoroastrian conviction that fire is the purest of elements. In temples, flames burned eternally, tended with care, never allowed to be polluted by death or decay. Fire was truth made visible, the essence of Asher, order and righteousness. If small flames could purify households and communities, then the final flame, poured out by the serpent star, would purify the entire world. This belief shaped ritual life. Daily prayers before the hearth flame, offerings at temple fires, fasts and confessions. All were rehearsals for the trial ahead. Each act of truth was practice for the walk through the molten river. Priests reminded their congregations that the fire would not harm the righteous. It would cleanse them like gold purified in a furnace. The wicked, by contrast, would be revealed as dross consumed by the flames. The universality of this trial gave it weight. Kings and beggars alike would face the same river. Achaemenid rulers, who carved their victories into stone, would stand no taller than the poorest shepherd. Wealth could not bribe the flames, nor armies shield against them. For a society that believed in hierarchy, this vision was radical. The molten river would strip away all masks, leaving only truth. Persians were not alone in imagining judgment by fire. Babylonians spoke of Nergal, the god of plague and war, whose torch could scour cities. Jewish texts from the Persian period describe a refiner's fire, and a day when the earth would melt like wax. Early Christians envisioned a lake of fire where the wicked would be cast. Yet Persia's prophecy was unique in its detail. Not a torch, not a lake, but a river of molten metal flowing across the entire world, forcing every soul to walk through it. This image gave meaning to suffering in the present. When drought struck, priests said it was a shadow of the molten river. When famine came, it was a rehearsal for the fire to come. Each hardship reminded Persians that the trial was certain, that truth alone could protect them. To survive famine by clinging to honesty was to practice for survival in the fire. To cheat in hunger was to guarantee destruction when the true river arrived. It also gave hope. For those who endured injustice, the molten river was proof that wrongs would not last. Greedy nobles, corrupt judges, deceitful merchants, all would face the flames. No lie could survive them. The fire would expose, cleanse, and restore the world. Evil would not be allowed to endure. The vision of the river also traveled. When Jews lived under Persian rule, they absorbed some of its imagery. Later, apocalyptic writings speak of fire devouring the enemies of God, of the heavens burning with heat, of a new world rising afterward. In Christian texts, the final judgment is marked by fire that tests every soul. Across centuries, the Persian river flowed invisibly, shaping how others imagined the end. And yet, for all its antiquity, the prophecy still resonates. A world drowned in molten metal is a terrifying vision, but not an impossible one. In the 20th and 21st centuries, new fears have taken shape. Factories belching smoke, cities choking on heat, glaciers melting into seas. The language has changed, but the dread is familiar. Some whisper that the river of molten metal might be read as climate itself turning against humanity, heat rising, earth burning. Others point to the spectre of nuclear fire, the instant melting of cities in man-made suns. Still others speak of industry's furnaces, iron and steel reshaping the planet, until even the air is thick with metal. The Persians could not have named global warming or nuclear weapons, but they knew that humanity lived under judgment and that fire would be the judge. The Serpent star was their explanation, the molten river their warning. Our explanations differ, but the anxiety is the same. The fear that the world can burn, that no wall or throne will protect us, that fire will one day test what humanity has built. To treat the prophecy as metaphor would miss its force for the Persians themselves. They believed it literally. Yet prophecy, once written, does not remain fixed. It travels, it mutates, it whispers in new ears. What once was the Serpent's river can now be read as the flood of carbon and heat. The furnaces of industry, the possibility that the earth itself can turn molten under our hands. This is not to say the Persians foresaw our present. It is to say that their language still has the power to describe it. The molten river, rolling over the world, testing each soul. It is an ancient vision, but it has never lost its relevance. Whether the fire falls from the Serpent star or rises from our own making, the truth of the trial remains. And that was the heart of the prophecy. Truth. Not who ruled, not who was rich, but who lived in Asher, the order of truth, against Druj, the lie. The molten river was the last court, the final judgment. It stripped away excuses, erased masks, and revealed the essence of every life. So Persians lived in preparation. They tended fires, recited prayers, confessed sins, and clung to truth. They raised children to fear the serpent and to hope for the fire, for only in fire would the world be cleansed. To them, the river was not only doom, it was promise. After it, creation would be remade pure, and perhaps that is why the image endures. Not only because it terrifies, but because it promises renewal. The river destroys, but it also purifies. It burns, but it also remakes. It is death and resurrection at once, spoken first on the Persian plateau, but echoed still wherever people fear that fire waits at the end of history. The Persians lived with the certainty that one day all humanity would be summoned to a trial by fire. It was not a courtroom in marble halls, not a council of gods on high thrones. It was a river of molten metal rolling across the earth, a flood that spared nothing in its path. Every soul, from king to shepherd, would be forced to walk through it. No lie could be hidden there. No mask would survive. Humanity would be judged, and judged in fire. This conviction gave shape to daily life. In the villages of the empire, parents taught their children that truth was not merely polite. It was the difference between survival and destruction. One day, they would say, you will stand in fire. Better to burn with honesty than to be consumed with lies. A child's first lesson in speech was tied to eternity. To speak falsely was to feed the serpent star, to betray creation itself. In the markets, merchants felt the same weight. To shave silver from a coin, to cheat with false weights, was not cleverness. It was treachery against truth, an act that weakened the bonds of the cosmos. Priests warned that each dishonest bargain gave strength to Az, the demon of greed, whose weapon was Gochir. A man might enjoy profit for a day, but when the molten river came, his gold would not save him. It would melt away with him. Judges and kings carried an even heavier burden. In Persia, justice was never only about order in the marketplace or obedience in the provinces. It was about siding with truth itself. A corrupt verdict in court did not merely harm the accused. It loosened the chains of the serpent above. A bribe accepted in a palace did not simply enrich a courtier. It fed Druge, the lie, and invited the serpent star's thrash. Kings who styled themselves as guardians of Asher, truth and order, knew that their power was conditional. If they ruled unjustly, if they let corruption spread, then even the greatest empire could be judged. The Magi, keepers of fire and interpreters of prophecy, made sure this was never forgotten. In times of prosperity, they warned that wealth was a test. In times of famine, they said the serpent was stirring because men had abandoned truth. And always they reminded rulers that no army could shield them from fire. No fortress was strong enough. When the molten river came, all would stand equal before it. This belief made Persian law a cosmic affair. Disputes over land, quarrels over inheritance, the punishment of thieves, each decision carried eternal weight. A judge who lied, a scribe who forged, a king who failed to defend justice, these were not simply corrupt men. They were traitors in a war that spanned heaven and earth. Every lie in court weakened creation. Every truthful verdict tightened its bonds. The power of this vision was that it included everyone. Babylonians feared omens that struck cities. Greeks spoke of souls wandering in shadow after death. But Persians said that every individual, no matter how humble, would walk through fire. A shepherd in the mountains of Bactria and a king in the palaces of Persepolis had the same fate awaiting them. The river would not respect crowns. The flames would not be bribed. This universality gave the prophecy a strange equality. In a world of hierarchy, where nobles ruled commoners and kings ruled nobles, the final trial stripped all ranks away. A beggar who lived in truth could walk unburned, while an emperor who lived in deceit would be destroyed. The molten river made no distinction between the silk of Susa and the wool of a shepherd's cloak. All would burn or survive together. For ordinary Persians, this was both comfort and fear. Comfort because it promised that the injustices of the world would not last forever. A cruel master, a corrupt official, a dishonest merchant, all would face the same fire. Fear because it meant no one was exempt. Every careless lie, every hidden act of greed, every unconfessed sin would be exposed when the fire came. Nothing would be concealed. Ritual life prepared people for this judgment. Confession and purification were central acts. Men and women bathed in sacred waters, fasted and performed acts of charity, feeding the poor, tending the fire, speaking truth. These were not simply duties to the community. They were rehearsals for the day of judgment. Priests reminded worshippers that in practicing virtue, they were strengthening themselves to walk through the molten flood unharmed. Even on the battlefield, the prophecy echoed. Soldiers swore oaths of truth before combat, for to fight under deceit was to weaken the army, not only in flesh, but in spirit. Victories were praised as triumphs of Asher. Defeats were interpreted as moments when Druj had gained ground. The clash of armies was more than politics. It was another front in the eternal struggle between truth and the lie, a prelude to the final fire. The Persian conviction that humanity itself would be judged influenced more than their own empire. Jews who lived under Achaemenid rule absorbed elements of the prophecy. In their writings, visions of fiery judgment appear, where God refines his people as silver is refined in a furnace. Later, Christians adopted similar imagery, envisioning a last day when the earth would be consumed by flame and the wicked cast into fire. The Persian idea that truth itself would be tested by fire seeped into the foundations of later apocalyptic thought. What made the Persian prophecy endure was its clarity. It did not leave the afterlife vague or shadowy. It described in detail a river of molten metal, a trial every soul would face, a judgment that spared no one. Its very harshness gave it power. The people could imagine it, fear it, and prepare for it. And the preparation was lifelong. To tend the household flame, to speak honestly in business, to honor justice in court, to live humbly in wealth. All of these were ways of training for the trial. Persians lived as though the molten river was always near, its heat felt in every decision. Their faith was not a promise of escape, but a demand for readiness. Even now, the image resonates. The idea that humanity can be stripped bare, tested by fire, and remade in truth has not left us. In the nuclear age, in fears of climate collapse, in the anxiety of global crises, echoes of Persia's prophecy remain. Fire still feels like the final test. The Persians did not foresee our world, but they left us a language for it. For them, though, the vision was never metaphor. It was certainty. They lived beneath the prophecy, measuring every act against the fire to come. They believed that when the serpent broke and the molten river flowed, humanity itself would be judged, and that truth, and only truth, would endure. After the serpent fell, after the molten river had rolled across creation, the Persians believed that the world would not end in ashes. It would stand renewed. The fire was not final. It was a passage, a furnace through which creation would pass and emerge cleansed, perfected, and eternal. This was the Frashokereti, the final renovation. The Bundahishan describes it in language both stark and astonishing. Once the last lie had been burned away, the dead would rise, not as ghosts in shadows, not as dim spirits wandering fields of mist, but as whole men and women, perfected in body and soul. The old would rise young again. The sick would rise healed. The maimed would rise whole. Families torn apart by death would see each other again, not in grief, but in joy, standing side by side in a world that no longer knew loss. Creation itself would be remade. Mountains, which once divided peoples, would be leveled. Valleys that held floods would be filled. The earth would become a single vast plain, fertile and open, a land where no man would hunger and no woman would weep. Rivers would run pure, never fouled, never dry. Trees would bear fruit without end. The air itself would be cleansed of decay. No smoke, no pestilence, no rot would remain. Time would end, but the world would continue. This was the radical heart of the Persian vision. Eternity was not escape into a distant heaven, nor flight into an immaterial soul's world. Eternity was here, on earth, remade. The fields where barley once failed would flourish forever. The hearth where a family had prayed in hardship would glow without end. Paradise was not somewhere else. It was this world, restored. At the center of this transformation stood Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, triumphant at last. For millennia, he had contended with Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction, locked in a struggle that defined every life. At the Renovation, that struggle ended. Angra Mainyu and his demons, as, with her endless hunger, the legions of the lie, all would be thrown into the molten fire and dissolved. Evil would not merely be defeated, it would be erased, incapable of returning. Creation would be safe forever. The Magi taught that this outcome was woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. The world was not a battlefield without conclusion. It was a drama with an ending, scripted from the beginning. Every drought, every famine, every war had been part of that script, leading toward the day when truth would triumph. And when the Renovation came, the arrow of history would fly no further. There would be no more need for calendars, no more fear of cycles. Time itself would stop. What remained was eternity. For ordinary Persians, this hope colored the hardships of life. A farmer who watched his crops wither could believe that one day he would plow fields that never failed. A widow, mourning her husband, could believe that she would see him again, whole, alive, perfected. A soldier who died far from home could believe that his sacrifice was not wasted, for he too would rise, and death itself would be no more. For rulers, the Renovation was both promise and warning. On the one hand, their victories would not be lost. They would be remembered in the perfected world. On the other, their crowns would not set them higher than others. In the Frashokereti, all stood equal. Kings and shepherds shared the same eternal life. Thrones were stripped away. Justice, not power, determined survival. The idea of the Renovation also reshaped memory. If the dead would rise, then no act was wasted, no life forgotten. The injustices of the past would be righted. The forgotten would be remembered. The silenced would be given voice. In a world often cruel, this was a staggering promise. Nothing was lost. All would be restored. The vision of a world perfected did not remain in Persia alone. Jews living under Persian rule absorbed its imagery. Their prophets began to speak of a new heaven and a new earth, of the dead raised to life, of God wiping away every tear. Christians inherited the same vision, promising that death shall be no more. Islam too envisioned a final resurrection, a paradise where evil was gone and life endured forever. Across centuries, the Persian hope of renovation seeped into the veins of world religion. And yet, Persia's vision remained distinct. It was not escape from Earth, but Earth renewed. It was not souls floating in ethereal bliss, but bodies restored in tangible perfection. It was not a heaven above, but a paradise here, in the fields and rivers of a world remade. This insistence that matter itself would be saved was revolutionary. Where many faiths distrusted the flesh, Persia exalted it, promising that bodies themselves would rise perfected. The Renovation also marked a revolution in thought. Most cultures of the ancient world saw time as a wheel, endless cycles of rise and fall, birth and death, destruction and renewal. The Greeks spoke of eternal recurrence. The Indians imagined kalpas stretching into infinity. The Persians broke the wheel. They proclaimed that history was linear, that it had a beginning, middle, and end, and that the end was good. This idea, born in Persia, has shaped the world ever since. What did it mean to live under such a vision? It meant that every act carried eternal weight. To lie was not only a sin for the moment, it was a fracture in the world to come. To speak truth was not only virtue, it was a contribution to eternity. Priests told their congregations that every truthful word, every just deed, every fire kept alive was a step toward the perfected world. Ethics was not only survival in the present, it was participation in the future. Imagine what it would have felt like to hear this promise. A man crippled in youth could believe that in the Renovation he would run again. A woman scarred by childbirth could believe that in eternity she would be whole. Parents who buried children could believe they would hold them again, alive and joyful. No other ancient faith offered so complete a restoration. It was not escape, it was redemption. In this way, the Renovation was more than theology. It was resilience. It gave Persians the courage to endure suffering, to bear injustice, to hope against evidence. Empires could fall, kings could be slain, temples could burn, but the promise endured. The world would be remade, and perhaps this is why the prophecy still resonates. We no longer speak of serpent stars or rivers of molten metal, but we still long for a final renovation, a world where evil is gone, where suffering is healed, where nothing is lost. The Persians believed that day would come. They built their lives around it. And through their vision, the hope of a perfected world has never entirely faded. Persepolis lies broken in the desert. Columns rise like ribs of a fallen beast. Carved lions still snarl on the staircases, though no ambassadors climb them now. The great halls where kings receive tribute are blackened, their roofs long gone, their reliefs scarred by fire. Alexander's soldiers burned them more than 2,000 years ago, and the wind has finished the work. Yet for all that ruin, the place is not silent. It speaks in stone and in memory. Here, the great kings declared themselves chosen of Ahura Mazda, guardians of Asher, truth and order. Here, priests tended golden basins of fire. Here, the empire believed itself secure against chaos, and yet it fell. Persepolis did not keep the serpent chained. Its altars died. Its empire crumbled. Its stones were left to the wind. But the prophecy endured. In villages and towns, far from ruined palaces, the fires burned on. Priests recited the old hymns, repeating that Gochir, the tail star, still hung above, chained but restless. Families prayed before their hearths, teaching children that truth was their shield against fire. Empires might collapse, but prophecy could not. Long after the fall of Persepolis, the story traveled. Jews under Persian rule spoke of fire that would refine the world, of the dead rising to life. Christians promised that death itself would die. Islam spoke of a day when scales would weigh every soul. Each voice carried echoes of Persia. Each faith repeated in new words what the Magi had said here. Humanity will be judged, creation will be remade, evil will be gone forever. Even now, the heavens give reasons not to forget. Comets return, sudden and brilliant. Astronomers log them as natural bodies, dust and ice obeying orbits, yet their appearances still unsettle. Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, III, Atlas in 2025. Each a wanderer, each a fragment, each another whisper that the watchers have not gone. The ruins of Persepolis remain while the stars move on. Columns catch moonlight. Reliefs cast long shadows. To stand here at night is to feel both the weight of history and the persistence of prophecy. Kings have fallen, but the story of the Serpent star still circles above, unbroken. And yet, stones alone cannot end the story. They endure, but they do not remember. Memory belongs to people. Picture, then, not the ruin, but the life that once filled it. A young man stands among these stones when they were still whole. The night is clear. A strange light flares above the mountains, a tail stretching across the sky. He feels fear because he knows what fire means. He has heard the priests speak of Gochur, the serpent star, chained in the heavens until the day it falls. He remembers his father warning that greed feeds the serpent, that lies loosen its bonds. He looks up at the fire trace and wonders if this is the moment. The comet fades after weeks. The young man lives his life. He tills fields, marries, raises children, and dies long before the serpent star falls. He never sees the molten river. The prophecy does not end in his time, but his fear, his awe, his whispered prayers are not lost. We remember them. His gaze at the fire is part of the story that carried forward, part of the prophecy that crossed empires and centuries. Now only stones remain where he once stood, but above them the stars still burn. Another light will rise, faint at first, then brighter. Scientists will call it a comet, name it III-ATLAS, measure its orbit. Others will see something more. A fragment of the serpent, another return, another reminder that the watchers are never gone. The stones of Persepolis stand mute, but the story they housed, the story of fire, of judgment, of a world remade, still speaks. And in that story, the young man is not forgotten. His fear is ours. His prophecy is ours. The watchers have always returned, and perhaps they always will.